right. Well, I'm here with Doug to talk about the day of action and many other things. It is Friday, March 22, 2025. And most of my stories this time are politics. Um, I'll just mention the day of action. If perchance you are disturbed with the role of the current U.S. government, like some of us are, Tesla Takedown has got a big day of action coming on March 29. So at every Tesla showroom, of which there are only apparently 277 in the United States, every single one of them is going to be protested at once, but I recommend. Anyway, the so education is where it starts. You remember Ron DeSantis totally took over the new college in Florida a while ago and just replaced the professors and replaced the administration and turned it into a right-wing propaganda outfit and removing the previously fact-based education, and Trump is doing the same thing on a national level. They've sent Columbia University a ransom note. Columbia University has received $400 million in federal funding, but not anymore. They're not going to get any of that funding for scientific research until they meet the political goals of Trump, which primarily consist of policing student protests and placing the Department of Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies under hostile control, something called academic receivership, which is essentially what Ron DeSantis did in Florida, where they put like a politician in charge of your college department to make sure that you're teaching politically correct stuff, uh, what the right calls politically correct. So this is more the Cultural Revolution, and they do the same thing to University of Pennsylvania. Um, they are halting all funds to it because they let a transgender athlete compete on the women's sports. So we can expect more of this. And of course, just yesterday, he signed the executive order ending the Department of Education. So I think that will end student grants, and I think that'll be the end of City College. I think they rely completely on student grant money. Um,
Hmm.
Probably be the end of most colleges, I think.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
We'll see, right? We'll see.
Yes. All this stuff gets declared illegal in court. They're not going through the right process for any of it. So perhaps that will make a difference. Uh, like I say, really, we're going through exciting times. And
Yes.
undermining education is one of course, the main goals of the Republican Party because uneducated voters prefer them. So, and they see, I
So,
remember when I was a kid, they said education will just turn you against your family and against God. That's the general belief. You get all these foolish ideas, which cause you not to agree with your ignorant family back home.
yeah, true. So, Sam, is this part of Project 2025?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It was all
Yeah.
totally written up. Yep. The only part that they haven't yet done is banning pornography and divorce, but I guess that's coming soon. All the rest of it is rocketed ahead. I heard an interview with the architect of Project 2025, and he said, "This is all amazing. It's wonderful. It's happening much faster than I thought it possibly could." And that's Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon said, "We're going to have some resistance, so we have to achieve muzzle velocity, do this stuff really fast
Yeah.
before anybody can stop it in the courts or anything."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's happening.
Yeah, because the courts are slow and
Yeah.
presidential orders are quick.
Yeah. And, the courts have now demanded that they rehire most of the people that they summarily fired because when they said they had poor performance when they didn't, that was obviously a lie. And so now even if they comply with that, the fact is a bunch of them are just quitting anyway. And I think anybody working for the U.S. government should just be planning to quit. I mean, obviously, you're just going to get laid off anyway. And if you stay, they won't let you do your job. And you got to ask yourself, why am I doing this when I could make more money in the private sector?
Yeah, and for some of these people, if I don't know if you brought this up, but they don't have contact information for them.
Right. Right. Because, well, they
Yeah.
canceled their work email. Same thing at Twitter. They cancel your work email and now they can't reach you, of course.
Yeah. Very convenient.
It happened to Microsoft. I heard it at one of the conferences that you organized. Microsoft implemented federated identity management. So all with Ross Perot's company, the one that prints checks, APM or something like that. And
Yeah.
they said, so your Microsoft Active Directory login would also be to log into the partner company so you could get your W-2, but then they had layoffs. So now the laid off people couldn't get their W-2 because they couldn't log into Active Directory anymore. They said, oops, we hadn't thought of that. The same kind of thing, you know. So,
I see.
and anyway, so then we've got the immigration xenophobia. And I remember the first time Trump was in, the first thing he did was declare a Muslim ban. But as usual, he just does it like overnight without any planning. So the next day, all these people were like on flights trying to get to the next plane, and they'd say, nope, you can't come in. And the border guards didn't know what to do. So they were like interviewing people to see what they think of Donald Trump to decide whether to let them in. And that's happening again. Now, the immigration authorities are all excited, so they've just been blocking all kinds of random people, like a French conference goer trying to present scientific research at a conference. Was checked for screening. They examined their computer and phone. They found text messages criticizing Trump and kicked him out for that reason. And uh, and they confiscated their equipment and sent him back. Then there's a Canadian who they grabbed and locked in a freezing cell for 2 weeks with no access to a lawyer, with all the friends and family not be able to find out where they were. And so 3 German citizens were held similarly, just grabbed on for minor infractions or accused of something and held without any explanation, with no due process, with nobody knowing where they are or how to get them back. So the Britain and Germany have both updated their travel advisories for coming to America, warning people that this can happen. And I think, I was thinking that it's probably very unwise for anyone to travel to America right now. Many Canadians are refusing to come here now that Trump's made it very clear we're basically going to start a war with Canada and Mexico and Iran. And the, I was thinking DEF CON should probably warn people, foreigners, not to come. But it's too late. They've already got planning. I just saw an email. There are workshops that are going to be run by foreign people coming here. And I'm not sure I'd recommend that right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I
You need
guess,
to plan ahead for DEF CON. That's still 7 months away, six
yeah,
months
yeah.
away.
It's August.
But
Yeah.
yeah. So, oh, yeah.
I remember
So,
same thing happened after the Snowden revelations. After the Snowden revelations, DEF CON officially canceled all the talks by U.S. government personnel, and they warned all U.S. government personnel not to come to DEF CON because they couldn't guarantee your safety, because everybody was very, very, very mad at the government. And
yeah.
I remember I was on the review team that year, and there were talks I rejected, and then they grabbed them out of the trash bin and unrejected them because they had to cancel all the talks done by official federal government people, and they needed some new talks. There was some lunatic had a talk about UFOs, and I said, "What is this shit?" And they rejected it, and then it was on the list. I said, "How did that piece of junk get back approved?"
Yeah.
So, you know, this is, and I think it might be wise to do that again. Maybe they should pull all the talks from foreign visitors saying we really don't recommend foreigners coming to America right now. We're not
Yeah.
sure you'll be able to leave or were you able to get in or anything. So,
Interesting, huh? Well, I got one for
yeah,
you. This
yeah,
is a quick one.
yeah.
Not sure if you saw this in the news, but California's cryobank has a data breach. And California Cryobank is the largest sperm, egg, and this sort of surprised me, embryo storage facility in the US.
Well, I know in IVF they do make embryos that have to be. I guess that's what they are. That's one reason why the Christian fundamentalists don't like IVF, because you make like 7 or 8 embryos, then you only use one, then you throw the others away.
Yeah, and they tried to make that murder.
Well, you could make that argument if you believe
Yeah,
life begins at conception.
yes.
Why, this is the problem with biology. It doesn't fit in, like we said, gender rules. People don't neatly fit into 2 genders. And there's not this magic moment when the process of reproduction creates a new human. It's just sort of this gradual process. And where you want to draw the line is pretty arbitrary.
Well, it's interesting. I heard a talk about that, and it was a paper by a doctor. When does life begin?
Yeah.
It was going to the Supreme Court, and the decision was when a heartbeat could be detected, which is, I believe, about 10 weeks.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah, but they argue whether that's really a heart. Apparently, that's not so clear. And I think the best explanation I've
yeah,
heard is life does not begin; it continues. You have a couple living beings, and then you have another living being emerge from that. But there wasn't a moment where it fissioned into a separate being that's other than birth. There's not a very clear.
Yeah, which is separation.
Right.
Yeah.
And
But I've,
Roe versus Wade, that viability, that makes some sense too when it could
yeah,
outside the mother.
yeah,
But in the early Middle East ages, it was quickening. When the baby starts kicking, that's when you figure it's alive. But you could
yeah,
any one of these arbitrary lines is about as good as any other from a scientific point of view.
yeah, yeah, you're right. But, I think George Carlin put it best.
Yeah.
And that is, we are the product of a sexually transmitted terminal disease.
Yeah. Yeah. You could say that. Yeah. Yeah. And
I
I think
thought that was one of the best lines.
yeah, and I think this is the this is fundamental problem with the human condition is we are aware of our role and then we try to like quantify it and we try to place limits and rules on it. And
Yeah,
then then reality intrudes upon our clean ideas like, the current fashion in America that there's only two sexes. I say, well, it's not that simple. And boy,
it
anybody
is.
that grew up on a farm would know this. We just among our cats and chickens and stuff, there were quite a few of them that were not clearly one gender or the other. I remember one cat born sexless, and it's quite common. In fact, this used to be a big deal when I read old middle-aged stuff. Someone would be born, they would say, "Your child is perfect," and what they mean is they had the expected number of fingers and toes and genitals because so often they are missing something like that you think is
Yeah,
like super important. It's not that rare a thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
So anyway,
Anyway, so the cryobank has a data breach. I'm not sure. Release of information, not a lot of details on it is typical, but they had to comply with the law to say
oh,
that they had this breach.
well, what kind of information do they have? Does it really matter? Uh,
Well, what they would have is sperm egg donors, who they came from.
yeah, but is that really something you'd be ashamed of or punished for donating sperm or something? I wouldn't think so, but maybe I'm missing something. It doesn't seem to be
Well,
particularly scandalous or anything.
yeah, it's too early to tell where this
Yeah.
could go. I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
However, I will tell you at UCSF Med Center, San Francisco, there were two or three doctors about 20 years ago who had 20, 25 years ago, who had an incredibly successful rate of IVF success.
Because
I
they
think
were
I
just,
probably told you the story.
well, I heard about the one guy that was just using his own sperm forever.
Well, that was a different doctor.
Okay. All
He
right.
he was in Pennsylvania, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken,
okay.
and it's claimed that he has over 80 kids.
I imagine. Yes. He told
And
people it was Nobel laureates or something. It was just his sperm.
yeah, and he said he would tell the women it's quite fresh.
Well, and I've heard this is actually a recurring problem. They don't have enough donors, so they lack sperm. So they end up resorting to these unorthodox alternatives.
I don't know. I think each case is different,
Yeah.
but at UCSF, this is kind of interesting. So women or couples were paying lots of money for IVF procedures, and they had an incredibly high rate of success.
Hmm.
And the question is, what's their secret sauce? What's their
Yeah.
formula for
Yeah.
getting eggs and sperm, right, from older women, especially to become viable?
He was using eggs from younger women, or what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they had a portfolio of pictures that looked like their patients,
Yeah.
male, female, and they'd get the mix together and say, poof, here you are.
Well, I mean, that could be a legitimate process if you told them.
No, they weren't
That's
told.
that's the
They was
problem. Yes.
that was that was a little problem.
I mean,
And
I could see that where they say your eggs are no longer any good, but we can find one that's pretty close, and you'll get a kid that will be good enough. In a rational world, that might actually be something people would agree to, but
so the outcome of this is you now have all these kids that are out there,
they're not really
and
genetic matches to their so-called parents.
right. And what UCSF has had to do is keep a database and kind of keep tabs on these to make sure that they don't, essentially bump into each other, get married, have kids.
Well, that's another issue too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Well, yeah,
kind of interesting.
yeah.
And what happened to the doctors? They were, when they were doing these procedures, it was kind of $1 to UCSF and $5 to us in the payment terms.
Oh,
And all the,
UCSF did this
yes,
knowingly?
UCSF. Yes.
Oh,
Well, not knowingly.
okay.
So the doctors were kind of subcontracted or had their own
Right,
department,
right.
but they were affiliated with UCSF. But when it came time to payments, the the doctors were shortchanging UCSF. All the money was supposed to go to UCSF,
Oh.
but the way they did their accounting was, $1 for them, $5 for us.
Well, I guess if you're lying about the source of the babies, financial fraud is a small additional crime.
Ex-
I
exactly.
I imagine they got prison sentences for this. This sounds pretty horrible.
Well, the problem is you have to catch them first.
Well, you can just do DNA tests. I mean, the evidence seems clear.
No, I mean, so the doctors, I believe all three of them disappeared.
Oh, well, they
That's
fled.
what I'm
Okay.
saying.
Oh, they fled somewhere. Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, they're fled. I don't know if they've been caught.
Yeah.
So it's financial fraud. I'm not sure what the medical,
Some kind of medical
implication.
malpractice or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have lost their medical license, but
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know. So interesting. So I don't know with this cryobank breach.
Yeah.
We're not
Right.
sure where that could go either.
No, you're right. Family relations are so complicated. Often things turn out to be important that aren't immediately obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sam, I'm wondering. This is kind of a slim. There's an angle to this. Potentially, I wonder if somebody could go and claim, um, not child support, but inheritance.
Right. That's
Yeah,
that's the thing. And there might be people who have like secret other families and stuff. Yeah, this I can see how there might be some cases where this turns out to be important about that it was breached.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know.
I
We'll
know.
see. We have to
Yeah.
see.
I know there are people who have kids and they conceal from the kids the truth of their origin, that they really were adopted or something. So,
Yeah, or the things. The mother's daughter had the child, but the mother, which is
right,
really the grandmother, takes over.
right. And
But
these, yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe these
but
people would eventually feel abused and the truth came out because of a data breach.
yeah, which kind of brings me to a song that I think is probably from the 40s or 50s that goes along the tune of "I'm my own grandpa."
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah, I remember Grandpa Jones used to sing that one.
You
I
heard-
forget how it worked, but he ended up marrying his own mother or something. I don't know what the hell. I forget how that happened, but he had some
yeah,
convoluted argument where somehow this turned out to be.
but it turned out
Yeah,
it turned out to be correct, and
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, all right, I was very pleased to see a couple articles about cult psychology, which I think we're all very interested in. There's a nice one from Amanda Maricot at Salon, which I found pretty informative. Uh,
yeah,
there's got a couple news stories. The one that caught my attention was there's in Texas, only a couple of kids have actually died of measles so far. The outbreak is spreading to like 200 or 300 kids and it's spreading. So they interviewed an anti-vax company interviewed one of the families whose child had died. And they say, we would absolutely not take the MMR. The measles wasn't that bad. They got over it pretty quickly, the mother said of her other four surviving children. And for the one that died, well, it was her time on earth. Uh, they believe she's better off where she is now. So, even somebody that makes a monstrous mistake, like not vaccinating their children, and then they die, just says, oh, no, I would do it again. I've never touched that vaccine. Even my child dying has not convinced me I was wrong. And this
yeah,
differing to the similar result of how many people who voted for Trump are beginning to realize this was not really a wise move. And they had another guy like this. This guy lost his wife because he voted for Trump. She was overstayed her visa because she got trapped here during COVID. Then she married him and got a green card, but they deported her anyway. And he still will not admit that it's Trump's fault. He said he didn't create the system, but he does have an opportunity to improve it. Hopefully, all this attention will bring to light how broken it is. So this raises the interesting psychological problem of why do people cling to something when they know it's wrong and refuse to admit they're wrong. And they say decades of psychological research have shown that buyer's remorse makes people feel bad about themselves. And people will
Yeah.
push themselves up in rationalizations to avoid admitting they were wrong. So when they invented the term Trump derangement syndrome, this functions like suppressive persons, the Scientologist phrase for outsiders. It warns members against listening to reason, but it also contains a threat. This is how you'll be labeled if you leave the fold. And so uh, NPR just ran a three-part series about a journalist's failed efforts to de-radicalize his father, who had grown addicted to wild MAGA conspiracy theories prophesizing mass arrests of Democrats and the collapse of American cities. In the course of this series, the father loses both his wife and his daughter, who end their relationship with him rather than put up with this nonsense, and he just gets more contemptuous, saying he people are you can't understand anybody who would be skeptical that an electromagnetic pulse will soon wipe out New York City or that Barack Obama is about to be tried for treason. So, like I say, very rarely, once in a blue moon, there is someone who actually does the hard internal work that leads to real sustainable change. But most people who are radicalized are lost forever. Even if they give up the current cult or conspiracy theory, they will just jump right into another. And
Yeah.
that fits my and I remember this long before Trump. There was a guy I knew who had this theory that radio waves were controlling everybody's minds and brainwashing them. And this was all he would talk about, was spouting this nonsense. And he had all this so-called evidence of a secret military base in like Napa with antennas that were doing it and satellites that were doing it. And everybody was fed up with him. This is all he would babble about was this nonsense.
Was that the guy in the radio? Bell?
He might have
Remember?
got it from that guy, but the guy I knew was in real life.
Oh,
But there were, that's what they do. They find some source of this stuff. Oh, and when I was a kid, it was Satan was going to take over the world. There was a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. It was tied more into religion. And I think, there's just some people that get sort of an emotional thrill out of feeling like they are special and they know the secret truth, and they will just wander from one secret truth to the next. It also explains another thing. Seventh-day Adventists predict the end of the world about every 2 years, and then it doesn't end, and then they just predict it again, and people stay loyal to the church. And an outsider would say, "Wait, you would clearly leave the church when it's proven that they're wrong." But no, that's not what happens at all. They cling to it more tightly. So this is an important psychological thing for us to try to understand. And of course, in political truth, though, the point is Trump does not have only this kind of supporter. This is most of his base, but the election in America is determined by a tiny group, maybe 2 or 5%, that actually are swing voters that really didn't buy all this nonsense, but they voted for Trump thinking he might be a little bit better for the economy or something, and they can be switched to vote for a Democrat if the Democrats act a little nicer. You'll never move his hardcore base, but there is a swing group that's enough to move you over 50%.
yeah.
But
So do you remember?
yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember Art Bell? That's the name. He had a
Vaguely. Yeah.
radio show for years
Yeah.
called Coast to Coast. It was all about the paranormal, kind of
Yeah.
the midnight to 5 a.m. slot.
It was basically like the Weekly World News, right?
That I don't know, but
Weekly World News is the newspapers you'll see at a checkout stand, always full of like
oh,
Elvis is still alive and the Virgin Mary sawing a piece of burnt toast and stuff like that. Aliens have landed.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Basically, the earlier form of this before you had like Rush Limbaugh and whoever that guy with the rough voice is that took over, that make it all political and make you hate your neighbors. It used to be more innocent, like just aliens have landed or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right, right. It's gone to a new level right now.
Yeah, now it includes basically trying to start a civil war, which is doing more harm, I think, than it just used to just be crazy semi-religious stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's interesting where we're going here, huh?
I remember in the 70s or 80s when the internet was maybe not even the internet was just coming up, we said, great, this will bring about a glorious new age where people have information and the facts and the truth and they know, bigotry ends and ignorance will end because all this data will be available. And boy, that's not what happened.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sam. If you go back 50 years ago, give or take, before the
Yeah.
internet, people, for the most part, didn't have a voice. You
Yeah.
know, the only people that really had a voice were in media, whether it be newspaper, radio, TV,
Yeah.
and newspaper kind of got eclipsed by radio to a degree, and then radio kind of got eclipsed by TV because now you
Yeah.
could see, right? And now with the internet, you can have anybody
Yep.
have a large following.
Yeah. And I thought the most valuable stuff would win and the junk would sink down
Right,
and be ignored, but that's not what happened. I should have thought of this. Like the supermarket is full of all this food, so what do people do? They go for the ice cream and get fat. They don't go buy the good stuff. I mean, it's the same thing with information. It's more fun to watch Fox News and hear a bunch of lies that are fun to listen to from people that are groomed to look pretty than to watch, NPR and see sort of old ugly people tell you the truth that's kind of hard to understand.
right, exactly.
I mean, that's as educators, we're in the business of trying to make the truth fun. I think so. And that's our real that's why I say this is the
I
branch of stand-up comedy, this profession.
yeah. Well, it's a line I don't know who said it, that a lie travels the world or gets around the world before the truth gets out of bed.
That's
Was
right.
that was
Yeah.
that
Mark Twain or something said that.
yeah, Mark Twain
Yeah.
is what I
And
was thinking.
it's true, of course. It's much easier to tell people what they want to hear and they'll absorb that more happily than telling them the truth. The truth is generally hard to hear, like those people that have to admit they were wrong. I remember there was a religious exercise I did years ago where they said, think about a time in your life when you were really sure and you judged other people harshly and you hurt them, and then you found out you were wrong and you felt this horrible feeling. They said that horrible feeling is what it feels like when you're actually learning something. Seek out the experiences in life that give you that feeling. Those are the ones where you're actually growing. And I thought that was a very instructive lesson. You know,
Yeah, so would that apply to somebody that sits on a jury, convicts somebody, and
yeah,
then later realizes, whoops,
yeah.
the evidence that we saw that was presented was all a bunch of lies or
It would
fabricated,
might apply there. I think but it applies even more if it's really totally your fault. Not that you were fooled, but that you really decided
that
to
you were
do something.
duped,
Yeah,
in
but
other words.
being duped is one thing, but what's even worse is when you made the decision yourself. Without you can't blame somebody else.
I see, I
Gave you bad
see, I
information.
see.
But both these are all good. The fact is, most people try to avoid that bad feeling of admitting you're wrong. And that was the point of this lesson is to know that's a good thing. When that happens, that means you're actually growing.
Yeah, yeah,
And you need to
uh,
accept that, sort of like the pain of exercise.
yeah. So I got one for you. This is kind of interesting. Stanford, Stanford University,
Oh
very
yeah.
prestigious,
Oh yeah.
close to Silicon Valley. A lot of people, including Elizabeth Holmes, she did not graduate from Stanford, but she attended Stanford and got into a lot of money, big companies. Elizabeth got into billions,
They're rolling
right?
in money down there.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, with Silicon Valley, there's a kind of a love-hate relationship with the military,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
They keep like
military,
remember at one time Google said we won't do any military contracts, but then they said, "Oh, yes, we will." And the staff rebelled and then they sort of snuck it in anyway. I mean, the fact is the military is a big customer, but people get mad when you do it.
yeah. So what's interesting is the attitude towards Stanford students have really changed about the military and jobs working with military contractors, with ICE, um, drone weapons, and military uses for the technology. And so now they're kind of pro military, pro ICE,
Yeah.
in supporting them with the technology, artificial intelligence. And students want to get hired now by these military contract companies.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I mean, I think maybe 2 decades ago, there was this general belief the military is pretty much East Coast, and they said all these West Coast liberals are
Yeah.
unpatriotic traitors and they'll never work for us anyway. And probably left over from the Vietnam War. But anyway, I think that's finally faded, and the modern generation doesn't see the military as that much worse than the corporations. I really don't.
Yeah. 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 True. Well, they are the corporations, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're the corporations' feed. Yeah. So I worked for a company.
Yeah.
Well, you did too.
Yeah.
And what did we sell? It was death, destruction, and disruption while maintaining world peace.
Well, my contribution, of course, is to teach cybersecurity everywhere I go. So I'm not directly
Right.
building bombs, but I did work for a military contractor. I don't think the
Yeah.
military is necessarily all bad. I mean, you need it.
No, no, you definitely need
And
it
they
at
need to secure their
times.
systems, so I don't regret
Yeah.
teaching cybersecurity. But I remember back in like the 70s and 60s, there were the hippies that said don't work for the man. They wouldn't want to work for the people. And it was Jacob Applebaum, the guy that held himself up as the moral arbiter of our age, greatly criticized my classes, where you get like Microsoft certification saying you're just making your students slaves of the military industrial complex. You should be a heroic rebel like me. Then he went off and like raped 8 women and got canceled. This is usually the case with holier than thou types. They're usually crusading about their morals because secretly their morals are horrible.
Yeah. So, Sam, there's a little history behind this with the Stanford story.
Yeah,
And if you go back to World War II days, it was with IBM, and IBM had
right.
been hired by the Nazis
Yeah.
to create computer programs to identify specific groups of people
And after
and to
that, South
track them.
Africa, South Africa
And
too.
South Africa did the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that at least I don't know that much about South Africa, but at least with IBM, the programmers that were teaching the Nazis had a program, the IBM German version of the machines, um, were had knowledge of what was going on based on notes in IBM's private historical records
Yeah.
that they have in their museum. And there was a journalist about 25 years ago who got access to it, got photos of it, and it clearly shows that people knew what was happening
Yeah.
to the Jews over there. Yet it they continued working for the company to receive a paycheck. So I guess, I'm thinking about this as I talk to you about this. That's no different than becoming a soldier and going out and being hired to kill somebody. Here you're writing a computer program that indirectly results in that. You're not doing it, but you're identifying the people. So
Well, this I think, I remember the Dalai Lama, they interviewed him and he said,
yeah,
I know that even in my bowl of vegetables, there are tiny little living creatures in there that are getting killed. And he said, you have to make some reasonable judgments
yeah,
in life. So you have to choose. I mean, you could just abandon all of this and become a penniless hermit in the woods if you want to be totally morally pure. But if you get involved in the world, then you have to make these judgment calls to accept a certain amount of negative consequence of what you do. And so there's some point when it's so evil you won't do it anymore. And there's some
yeah,
point when it seems like you're doing more good than evil and you accept it. And it's hard to draw that line and you have to find the line.
yeah, 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 right. It's up to each individual.
Well, yeah. Well, at some point the law steps in. Like
True.
these Israeli companies that make spyware and then seem to sell it to anybody, even if you're using it to jail your citizens and protesters. Then they keep busting them, saying, "Well, that violates the rules." There's a law somewhere where what you're doing is so evil, you actually stop you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And ultimately that can result in war, can it not?
Yeah, war or prison term or things like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
short of that, it's just kind of shades of gray, and you have to make a judgment. But of course, this is basically a lesson of risk management. It's better to actually understand what you're doing and what the consequences might be and make a calculated decision instead of just sort of getting seduced into it until you're in a bad place you don't want to be.
Yeah. True. True.
Yeah. So, so
All
anyway,
right.
speaking of which, I got a few more politics things and a little bit of cybersecurity, but not that much.
Okay.
So Neil Young is going to play a free concert in Ukraine. he says, which is pretty, if he can do it, it will probably have a big impact. Whether he can actually like get a concert hall and avoid getting bombed and, get electricity and all that stuff. But I mean, it would be a pretty strong statement, strong political statement if he can do it. So we'll see. Uh, he says he's going to keep on rocking in the free world. That's one way to. Anyway, also kind of a thumb in the eye at Trump, obviously. And so the United States had deleted the evidence of Russia's kidnaps of thousands of Ukrainian children. The United States had gathered the evidence, and the State Department deleted it. And the prosecutors say that's going to prevent them from prosecuting Vladimir Putin for war crimes. So we seem to be a vassal state of Russia now, just covering up
Mm,
Putin's crimes for him. And Social Security has hit a lot of news here. And the Republicans certainly want to end Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid while lying about it and claiming they're not doing that. So what you do is you do it a little bit indirectly. So what they're going to do is change in claiming that there's a ton of Social Security fraud. They're claiming that every Social Security person has to prove their identity now. They can't just make a claim by the telephone, and they have to use an online process, but most of them can't because they don't have a computer or they don't know how to use the internet. So they'll have to make a physical trip to the office. They say this will lead to like 75,000 more visits a week to the offices, and they're closing the offices and cutting the staff. And it already takes a month to get an appointment to get into a physical office. So this is what they tend to do. Instead of exactly canceling welfare programs, they just make it so burdensome that more and more people
yeah,
can't make their way through the bureaucracy. And that results in people not getting their benefits. And this is, and then when people get frustrated enough, the program will be unpopular, and then you can just cancel it, which is what they want. They want to just cancel the
right.
social safety
Yeah,
net because that's what Trump said. He likes the period 1870s when he had the Gilded Age. There was no income tax, no Social Security, no welfare, no Medicaid. He thought that was the glorious time, and the rich could just do whatever they wanted, and the poor people stopped complaining and just lived in their shack, sent their kids to like a workhouse, and didn't have any say in the matter.
yes, yeah,
Feudalism. Uh,
yeah.
so I thought this one's fun. Tesla, they looked at Tesla's accounting. Apparently, people have been complaining about Tesla's accounting all along. And for example, in the second half of 2024, they report having spent 6.3 billion on purchases of property and equipment, but the total amount of property and equipment only rose by 4.9 billion. 1.4 billion just vanished somewhere. So that's the kind of thing. Of course, the military, more than half of the budget just vanishes. When they do an audit, they can't explain
Right.
it. So that suggests that something is quite wrong. Um, and I think that's probably enough. There's been another one's hit all the headlines recently in the last couple of days. Trump was golfing on Monday, and he just said, I know, let's release all the JFK files. Release them tomorrow. So the staff had to stay up all night and release them, and he said, no redactions. They released them with no redactions. So now there's 200 Social Security numbers, private phone numbers, addresses of all the people that testified or who were on the committee or anything. That's why they were redacted previously. They didn't redact anything significant to the case. They redacted the PII of the people, but Trump ordered no redactions, so they released it with no redactions. They interviewed the staff and they said, we knew this was the wrong thing to do. We knew you had to redact it, but nobody can say no to Trump.
Hmm.
So he
That's
dumps it on the web.
interesting.
It's all out there. Yeah, all kinds of people are mad. One of Trump's lawyers is mad. His personal information was in there.
Yeah, those people are still alive.
Apparently, some of them are. You'd think so,
Yeah,
like in their
yeah.
80s. And so now that I heard this on Rachel Maddow last night, Trump ordered the Social Security office to give them all new Social Security numbers, which I didn't even know that was possible. And if you did it, it would just create a god awful mess. All your tax records, all your employers, I bet it would take years to straighten out. And these people are in their 80s or 90s.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
probably not really going to help them to give them a new Social Security number. That's probably just going to snarl up their financial life for the rest of their life.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're going to have to wait in line in the Social Security offices that have closed, right?
Yeah. And besides, that data broker just lost all our data 3 months ago. Everybody's Social Security number is already out there. That's what I would have said.
Yeah.
I said, well, it doesn't matter. It was all lost earlier anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Interesting, huh?
yeah,
I remember as a kid, growing up, we were told that Social Security number was not a number that should be used to identify you.
right. I remember everybody used it, and I actually was involved in one of the lawsuits it was a gas station that used it. It
Yeah.
was like in the late 90s or the early 2000s when they finally started enforcing this rule that nobody's allowed to use that number except the government. I mean, I started at City College. They were using Social Security numbers to identify students. Everybody did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And after
Yeah.
the first couple prosecutions, then everybody had to switch to the system where they assign you an ID number at every company.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, uh,
All right. Well, that's it for me.
okay. Well, I got a
Resume
couple.
on Tuesday.
Well, yeah, but I got a few information security
Oh,
ones.
oh,
Mentioned
sure.
not all just politics. This one's for
Okay.
Cloudflare,
Yeah.
middleman between your customers and your web server so they can see the traffic. So they look to see what passwords people are using, and they found that 41% of successful logins use compromised passwords. So, in case anybody had any doubt about this, everybody is reusing passwords. And
So wait, Sam, how,
yeah,
how does Cloudflare get the passwords?
if you use Cloudflare, they are the end of the HTTPS connection.
Ah, okay.
They can decrypt it and move it forward. That's why the purists didn't like it when Cloudflare appeared. But that's how they can filter out attacks and everything. Just like your corporate gateway, they can filter the traffic, and they do.
Yeah.
They made a system. They
Okay.
say we don't see the passwords, we hash it and then compare it to a table of hashes. So we're not actually directly handling the password. But anyway, the point is they can see that 41% of passwords are reused, compromised passwords.
Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah.
imagine anything else? We've all known password authentication is pretty insecure. It's pretty easy
Yeah.
to guess people's passwords. And then there's
Yeah.
one I thought was interesting. I did not know this. Microsoft's UUIDs, these 128-bit random looking numbers they
Right.
identify things. There's a built-in Windows API call to convert a UUID to its binary format. And so you can smuggle malware into a machine as a series of UUIDs. It's like base 64 encoding. You can then use a Windows API call to turn it back into a binary, load it in memory, and have malware, which is a new way to
I
smuggle
see.
malware into systems. I didn't know that UUID was a representation of a binary file, but apparently it is.
Hmm.
I thought it was
Boy,
just a
that,
random number.
yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And China put up a satellite to perform quantum key distribution from orbit, and they got it working. And quantum key distribution. Now, some people talk about quantum encryption, which is a different thing, but quantum key distribution is just where you transmit a key with one photon carrying each bit. And the point of that is if a photon can only be measured once, and when you measure it, you destroy it. So if you send a series of bits, one photon at a time, from one end of a fiber optic cable to the other, and then you send like an MD5 hash to see if it's accurate, if it passes that test, you know that nobody else got it, only the intended recipient, because a man in the middle would have destroyed it and lost half the data. So that's the point. This is like the old Mission Impossible show where they had these tapes and you could play it, and as soon as you play it, the tape burns up. So the idea is only one person can ever read this message.
So, Sam, what if you had a beam splitter?
You try that. The point is there's only one photon though, and you can't, and you can only perform one active measurement. So even if you run it through a beam splitter and has a 50% chance of going to the man in the middle, the point is when the man in the middle measures it, the data is lost. And technically you encode 2 bits of information in each photon, so one will be lost. That's the point. You can only the measure. This is the magical quantum mechanical process of the collapse of the wave function. You start in a superposition state, and when you measure it, it collapses to a deterministic state, and that's it. You cannot reconstruct the superposition state from that.
Hmm.
It's
That's
it's
interesting.
yeah, it is.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but how do you do? Remember the beam split experiment? Is a photon a wave or a particle? Where
It
you have two slits
right. The
and
two slit experiment proves
right.
that uh, for everything moves as a wave and arrives as a particle. And the famous two slit
Yeah.
experiment is even if you send one photon, at a wall with two slits in it, it will show an interference pattern on the other end, showing that it actually passed through both of those holes.
Both, right.
While it's moving, it moves as a wave, but when it arrives, it's a particle. It either arrives in one place all intact, it doesn't arrive smeared out. It only arrives once at one location. And that's the collapse of the wave function. While it's in while you're not measuring it, it spreads out into an undetermined state. But when you measure it, it coalesces down to one state and that's it. And that
I
destroys
see.
information, and you can never get back the information that was retained in the previous state. So
Okay.
this is the technique. Now these things have been around for more than a decade. I know Cisco sold them, other companies sell them. Quantum mechanics, quantum key distribution encryption systems. They use them at banks and stuff, but they've been limited to only go through like 100 miles of fiber. But China has said if you can send it through fiber, you can send it through free space, and they've got it working. So they were able to send, they were able to have a ground station negotiate a quantum key with the satellite, and then the
Hmm.
satellite negotiate with another one, and they were able to, using the satellite as a trusted relay, they were able to successfully share keys and send an encrypted communication between two cities separated by 12,900 kilometers.
Hmm.
So they go across the world this way. And,
Hmm.
it's a significant technical accomplishment. And the point
Yeah.
of this, of course, is other forms of encryption rely on mathematics, and maybe the mathematics will be broken. They're kind of defected in a mathematical encryption system, so it's not as secure as you thought. But this is a physical encryption system. You're distributing the key, and the security of that distribution is based on the fundamental principles of quantum mechanics, not on mathematical scrambling.
Yeah.
So it would
Yeah.
appear to be unbreakable. At least on it's not it's like the one-time pad. There's no mathematical weakness. It's based on
Yeah. Yeah.
principles of physics. So you'll only break it if you find some error in how they did the physics, which, by the way, is what happened with the first generation of quantum key distribution systems. The laser is supposed to be so weak that it only sends one photon per bit, but the early ones, the laser was like 1,000 times too bright. So in fact, there was a flood of photons. So now you could
I
measure
see.
half of them. And since they had automatic gain control on the detectors, this wasn't obvious. And
Hmm.
it's the same as anything else. Nothing's ever perfect, but this is a whole different kind of encryption.
Yeah.
Or it's
Yeah.
a whole different kind
Interesting.
of key distribution. Of course, once you've got the key, you then just use a standard technique like AES. So there is
Yeah.
the
Right.
math, but the key distribution, this solves the public key problem, which is the tough one. How to distribute a key over an insecure channel so only one person gets it. We currently do that with mathematical public key encryption, but that is in fact under attack and questionably weak now. So
Yeah.
it's
So
alternative.
that's the Diffie-Hellman key exchange.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diffie-Hellman key exchange and using things like RSA and elliptic curve, public-private key encryption, and all those are kind of sleazy, imperfect systems, and they're all in danger of being broken by quantum mechanic computers. So,
Yeah.
um, having an alternative system that does not depend on mathematics for key distribution is, in principle, quite valuable.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
Anyway, and so,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I think that's all that's worth mentioning. The other ones
Yeah.
are.
So Sam, I'll bring up one. I wasn't going
Yeah.
to bring this up, but Rohammer is back in the
Oh,
news. Did you
oh,
see that?
again? Oh, no, I remember
Yeah.
hearing about maybe 8 years ago where you just keep writing many times until the chip makes an error.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know what the latest attack, but I just saw a headline that Rohammer's back.
Yeah,
And this is an attack against memory,
right.
if I recall.
You just keep writing over and over again to the same spot, and eventually it makes some kind of error and lets you read something you shouldn't have been able to read. I forget the details.
Yeah. Too, too many cyber attacks to know them all. And
Yeah,
that one isn't that memorable, but I just remember it was attack against memory.
yeah, and I know the it's similar to the speculative execution ones, with which there are dozens.
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you exploit the fact that the processor is trying to work ahead. So it's actually when you're doing instruction number one, the processor is actually doing like number five too, and it doesn't notice that there was an if statement in between where it wasn't allowed to do number five, and you're able to deduce the consequences of what it did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all
Interesting.
and these are like you could call these all side channel attacks where it's not there's not a mathematical flaw in your algorithm. It's the fact that you're using real material hardware that causes unexpected consequences where you can leak
Right,
information out, like examining the time it takes to do it or the power consumed while it does it. This this is the problem. Your mathematics can be great, but when you actually build real hardware, then there are attacks that become possible
right,
based on
right.
the
Yeah,
specific hardware implementation. So apparently the fix for Rowhammer is to somehow improve your memory.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what the latest attack is,
Yeah.
but yeah,
I
it's
know
memory.
the fix for the speculative execution attacks is to improve your processor. And they've been trying to do that, add more security to the processor, without much luck. Every
I
generation they
see.
try to fix, and people find another version of speculative execution attacks that work. Um, the only real fix would be to stop doing pipelining, but that would degrade the speed of the processor by a lot, like a factor of 10. So nobody's willing to do that. But that's what it would take. If you actually just executed one command at a time, then we wouldn't have this problem, but it would be a lot slower.
Trade-offs,
Yeah, I would think, that
trade-off.
the high security systems like the military could just afford to pay for 10 processors instead of one, but this hasn't been a popular solution yet.
Yeah. All right,
All right. Yeah.
let's call it.
Yep. That's it for this
And
one. Next
yep,
one will be
we'll
on Tuesday.
resume on Tuesday.
Okay.